Mom's boyfriend moved into my house, and now he's trying to set a curfew for me. Hey Reddit, this is a throwaway account because some people involved know my main, and I'd rather keep this on the down low. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've been living in my own place for a while now. But let's back up a bit to how this all got started, particularly with my mom, who's 51. A couple of years back, she lost her house. Yeah, not the best turn of events, but the details aren't that important for what I'm about to unload here. Anyway, after she lost her place, it was a no-brainer for me to let her move in with me. I mean, she's my mom, right? Who wouldn't do the same? Plus, I've been doing all right financially. I work in tech, which pays more than enough to keep us comfortable without needing to tighten our belts. Her living with me was supposed to be temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But life has a funny way of redefining temporary. About a year ago, Mom started dipping her toes back into the dating pool. She met this guy, let's call him R, who's 48 and seemed all right at first. They hit it off pretty well, and 6 months into their relationship, they were pretty serious. Or as serious as you can get during the times of a global pandemic. When the lockdowns hit and everything started shutting down, R, who was also a divorced dad, was having a tough time with his place and the whole co-parenting gig. One night over dinner, Mom suggested that maybe R and his 2 kids, a 14-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy, could bunk with us until the global mess was sorted. It seemed reasonable enough at the time. His lease was up, and with the world going sideways, it felt right to offer some stability. Not just to Mom and her boyfriend, but to 2 kids who were about to face a lot of uncertainties. So they moved in. Figured, why not? I'd met R enough times to know he wasn't a complete jerk, and while we weren't exactly buddies, we were friendly. His kids were polite, a bit shy, but they seemed to warm up after a few movie nights and shared meals. I thought of it as helping out. Plus, it gave Mom something to focus on besides the past, which was a good thing in my book. Now, my house isn't a mansion, but it's spacious enough. 3 bedrooms, a couple of bathrooms, and a nice backyard that was mostly underused until the kids showed up. I took the master bedroom, Mom had her room, and R and his kids shared the 3rd one. We set up a schedule for chores, cooking, and all that household stuff, trying to make everyone feel like they had their own space and responsibilities. When R and his kids first moved in, it was under the whole banner of making the best out of a bad situation. The world outside was going nuts, and here we were, trying to build a little island of sanity. I won't lie, it felt good being able to help. And honestly, watching my mom smile more these days made any inconvenience seem small. That's the thing about family, or what feels like it at the time. You do what you can to make things work. The first few weeks were, I'd say, surprisingly smooth. R's kids were quiet, probably a mix of being in a new place and the whole situation with the lockdowns. They stuck mostly to their room or sat with us during meals, polite to the point of seeming a bit uneasy. But that's to be expected, right? New house, new man around their mom. It's a lot for anyone, let alone kids. R himself seemed to be making an effort. He'd help out with meals, sometimes taking over the kitchen to cook something he claimed was a specialty. You gotta try my chili, he'd boast, and honestly, it wasn't half bad. He was good about fixing things too. A leaky faucet here, a squeaky door there. I appreciated that. It made me feel like he wasn't just here to ride out the storm but actually contribute. Mom seemed really taken with how he was around the house, often throwing me a look like, see? He's a good guy. We set some basic rules early on. It was my house, and while I'm not some dictator, I needed some semblance of order. We agreed on quiet hours, shared responsibilities, and privacy. Basic stuff to keep the peace. R nodded along, adding that he had some rules for his kids, which I totally respected. It's his right as a dad, and I figured if he's laying down some law for his kids, he understood the need for some boundaries. The dynamic felt good. I'd finish up my workday and join everyone for dinner. We talk about all sorts of things, movies, the crazy state of the world, plans for the weekend. R would often share stories from his past about places he'd traveled to or jobs he'd had. It was interesting stuff, and it gave depth to the man my mom was with. I started to think maybe this could work out for the long haul. A thought that hadn't really crossed my mind before. However, it wasn't all perfect. There were small signs, little red flags, that I initially brushed off as nothing more than someone getting used to a new living situation. Like how R would insist on rearranging the living room to better suit the flow of the house, or his habit of leaving his tools scattered around after a fix-it job, promising to clean up later, which sometimes meant a couple of days. Small annoyances, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. Then there was the TV situation. I like to think I'm pretty generous with my stuff, but the TV in the living room was my pride and joy, latest model, Ultra HD, the works. I didn't mind sharing it, especially for movie nights, but R had a habit of commandeering it for hours, channel surfing endlessly. If his kids wanted to watch something, he'd bark at them about what they could and couldn't watch. Started to rub me the wrong way. This was still my house, after all. But I let it slide. Why? Because Mom was happy. She laughed more, joked more, and there was a light in her eyes that had been missing for a long time. So I bit my tongue, chalked up my annoyances to sharing space in a stressful time, and kept rolling with the punches. Then came the incident with the garage. I'm a bit of a car guy, always have been. The garage is my sanctuary, a place where I tinker and unwind. One weekend, I walked into the garage to find R rearranging my tools and workbench. Just making some space, he said. All casual, like he wasn't turning my private haven upside down. I appreciate the thought, R, but I've got a system here, I told him, trying to keep my cool. He shrugged, a bit too dismissive for my liking, but he stopped what he was doing. Sure thing, but it'd help if things were a bit more organized, right? That comment stuck with me. It was a nudge over a line I wasn't sure I wanted anyone to cross. Looking back, these first impressions were the foundation of what was to come. Small encroachments, tiny tests of boundaries, like he was feeling out how much he could push before I'd push back. In those early days, I was still seeing things through a lens tinted by my desire to make my mom happy. For now, though, those red flags were just fluttering in the periphery, not quite alarming enough to make a fuss about yet. As time went on, R's influence began creeping into every corner of the house like some kind of slow-moving flood. What started as small, manageable inconveniences began to feel like outright overreach. For example, groceries and meals were no longer a collaborative effort. At first, R pitched in occasionally, taking charge of dinner, which everyone appreciated. But gradually, he started making all the decisions about what we ate without asking for any input. If I suggested buying something different, he'd brush it off with comments like, no, the kids need to eat healthier, or I'm trying to teach them proper eating habits. Noble? Sure. But this was still my house and my fridge he was rearranging. Then came the rules. What started as reasonable bedtime and homework guidelines for his kids began morphing into house-wide mandates. One morning, I found a schedule posted on the fridge, complete with chore assignments for everyone, including me. We need to keep the place tidy, he'd say, as if I hadn't been living in a clean house before he showed up. The rules didn't stop at chores. He started setting limits on how late I could watch TV, suggesting it was disturbing, the house's sleeping schedule, and the TV itself? It was no longer a shared amenity, it was his domain. Movie nights became R's movie picks, period. If I suggested something else, he'd laugh it off with, maybe next time, but next time never came. Privacy became another issue. R had a way of walking into rooms without knocking. My bedroom, which I'd always kept off limits, was suddenly on his casual walk-through tour whenever he felt like it. Just checking to see if you need anything, he'd say, but it felt more like he was marking his territory. It wasn't long before his parenting style started spilling over onto me. I wasn't one of his kids, but you wouldn't know it from how he started talking to me. If I was heading out to see friends, he'd throw in his 2 cents. You sure you should be going out with the virus still around? Or, make sure you're back at a decent hour. The biggest clash came over the use of my home office. I work from home, which are new, but that didn't stop him from knocking on my door one afternoon with a proposal. I've been thinking, he began, your office would make a great study room for the kids during the day. You can work in the living room, right? He said it so casually, as if he were doing me a favor by reallocating my workspace. I stared at him, trying to process the audacity. I need the office to work, R. It's set up for my job, which, by the way, pays for this house, I finally responded, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. He looked taken aback, but only momentarily. Well, just a thought, he muttered before walking away. It was clear he saw no real boundary to his influence in my home. Talking to Mom didn't go as I'd hoped. When I brought up how R's behavior was becoming a problem, she deflected. He's just trying to help, or he's good with the kids. Isn't that what matters? It was frustrating. The more he overstepped, the more she justified it. I couldn't tell if she genuinely didn't see the issue or if she was too caught up in the relationship to admit there might be a problem. The situation kept escalating. It wasn't just about a room or the TV anymore. It was about respect and boundaries, 2 things that were quickly disappearing in my own home. I found myself retreating more, spending time in my room or out of the house just to avoid confrontation. But I knew this couldn't go on. Something had to give, and soon. The confrontation came faster than I expected, and it started over something as simple as a late-night run. It was a Thursday night, and after a long day of back-to-back Zoom calls and endless emails, I decided to go for a run. Late-night runs were my way of decompressing, a quiet time to clear my head. I got back around midnight, quietly slipped into the house, and went straight to my room to avoid waking anyone. The next morning, I came downstairs for coffee, ready to start the day as usual, but the atmosphere felt off. The kitchen was silent, the kind of silence that buzzes with unspoken tension. As I reached for the coffee pot, the living room door swung open violently, and there stood R, his face flushed with anger. In here, now, he barked. The command caught me off guard. I stared at him, trying to process what could possibly warrant this level of hostility. What's going on? I asked cautiously, but he ignored the question, motioning me into the living room. Reluctantly, I followed, and he slammed the door behind us. How dare you come into the house at midnight? slamming doors and stomping around, he yelled. You woke the kids. I blinked, confused. I didn't slam any doors, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I came in quietly. Quietly? He snapped. In this house, midnight is unacceptable. You need to respect the rules while you're under this roof. That was it. The sheer audacity of his statement, the gall to lecture me about rules in my own house, set something off inside me. My patience, already worn thin, snapped. Excuse me? I said, stepping closer, my voice low and firm. This is my house. I'm not one of your kids, and you're not my dad. You don't get to make rules for me. Not here, not ever. The room fell silent. R's face shifted from anger to disbelief, then back to anger again. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. You've been pushing boundaries since the day you moved in, I said, my voice rising now. Rearranging my garage, taking over the TV, posting rules on my fridge like you're in charge. Enough is enough. From the hallway, my mom appeared, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. Before I could answer, R turned to her, his voice filled with righteous indignation. Your son is out of control. He's disrespectful, and he doesn't follow any rules. I scoffed. Rules? In my own house? Mom, he's been acting like he owns the place. Telling me what I can and can't do, trying to dictate my life under my own roof. My mom looked between us, clearly torn. Maybe we should all sit down and talk this through, she said, trying to play the peacemaker. No, Mom. Not this time, I said, shaking my head. This isn't something we can just smooth over with a chat. He needs to go. Today. My words hung in the air like a challenge. R glared at me, his jaw clenched. Mom's face fell, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the ultimatum. But she didn't argue. Maybe she saw the truth in my words, or maybe she knew there was no point in fighting this battle. R stormed out of the room, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The aftermath was tense. R began packing his things, his presence now a shadow of what it had been. His kids, caught in the middle, seemed confused and sad, and I couldn't help but feel bad for them. They didn't ask for any of this. But I also knew that allowing R to stay would only prolong the damage, to me, to my relationship with my mom, and to the sanctity of my home. Mom, on the other hand, was distant. She avoided me for days, her disappointment heavy in the air. But as R's departure became imminent, she started to thaw. She saw him for who he was, not just the man she cared about, but someone who had overstepped his place and fractured the balance of our home. On the day R left, there were no tearful goodbyes or dramatic scenes. He packed up his things, loaded them into a rental van, and drove off with his kids. It was a quiet exit, marked only by the sound of boxes being carried out and the soft hum of the engine as it disappeared down the street. In the weeks that followed, Mom and I began to rebuild. At first, our conversations were stilted, fraught with unspoken tension, but gradually we started to open up. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she broke the silence. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have listened to you. I got so caught up in wanting to be happy that I ignored what was right in front of me. I reached over and squeezed her hand. It's okay, Mom. I get it. You wanted to believe in him and I wanted you to be happy. But not at the cost of our home. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I promise. I'll never let something like this happen again. In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. It wouldn't be easy, and there were still wounds to heal, but we were on the right path. Together. Life slowly returned to normal. The house felt lighter, freer, like a storm had passed and left behind clear skies. Mom started therapy, a step I was incredibly proud of her for taking. And me, I rediscovered the peace of having a home that was truly mine again. A sanctuary, not a battleground. In the end, the experience taught us both valuable lessons about boundaries, respect, and the importance of communication. And as difficult as it was, it brought us closer in a way we hadn't been for years. Here's to new beginnings.